Hello and welcome to Fearless Authenticity. This is my podcast about finding our success in the gift of who we truly are. These are conversations with people who know what that looks like, feels like, and the journey they've taken to get there. I hope that this will be an inspiration to you as well as myself about finding the ways we can use our unique gifts to pursue our passions, make our dreams come true, and serve the world in the way that we were created to. Now, as I always say, I hope this gets deep because that's where we find the good stuff, but never get it twisted. This is about the fun of life, because if it ain't fun, it ain't worth doing. So let's dare to be brave, be free, be you together. Now, my guest today is an abolitionist and lover of all Black people, assistant professor at Syracuse University in political science, African American studies, women's and gender studies, and LGBT studies, as well as senior research associate at the Campbell Public Affairs Institute at the Maxwell School. They're also a columnist for Teen Vogue, highly sought after writer for many online publications, including Al Jazeera, Washington Post, and many others. They co-run Colored Convo's media company, co-host the That Black Couple podcast, and have spoken about Black and feminist scholarship and race politics in the U.S. at everything from academic conferences to community-based events. They hold a PhD from the University of Chicago and master and bachelor degrees from California State University and USC. They're the recipient of many prestigious honors and awards and author of 2 books that are out this year, an academic project called Policing Blackness and Black Women Taught Us, an intimate history of Black women's activism. They are also my soror of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. I am honored and happy to welcome Jenn Jackson to the Fearless Authenticity podcast. Hey, love.
Hi, I did not know we were sorors.
Yes, I forgot to mention this.
Oh my God. And we've been talking for all this time, and here we are. This is such a blessing.
Thank you for having me. When I saw your bio and I saw that all at the end, I was like, how we ain't got to that? How we didn't get to that? I love it. I love it. Sisterhood is a beautiful thing.
It is.
There's so many places we could start, Jen. So many places we could start. So first off, congratulations on Black Women Taught Us. I see the book as a living document of what I'm talking about on this podcast, what it means to be fearless, what it means to be authentic, and finding purpose in what that looks like for each of us, each of the women in history that you talk about and the lesson that you learn from each of them. And I think it's especially good for those of us who've been pushed to the margins, for whatever reason. So I want to start with where your book starts. The ways that our elders, especially our mothers, our aunties, our female elders, prepare us to see ourselves in the world. Often in ways we can't see ourselves at first.
Yeah.
Because it feels like you've made connections on how you were prepped by them, not realizing that they were prepping you, and seeing community with them and their purpose as liberators, even though they weren't academics or purposely being organizers even.
Absolutely.
Is that a fair assessment of the legacy that you're going for in Black Women Taught Us?
That is spot on, right? That is spot on. I come from Oakland, California. A lot of my elders and foremothers were, 6th grade education, high school education. There weren't a lot of folks who were college educated. So they saw me and my desire to learn and go to college, and I had these big dreams. And they didn't exactly know how I would get there. They just knew what lessons they had and what resources they had to help me, right? And so I do start the book off talking about my auntie Barbara. And one of her earliest lessons was about how to cook my chicken all the way through, right? She was like, it's pink in the middle, right?
We've all done that. I literally was like, learn that lesson in my grandmother's kitchen.
Right. And, it's like little things like that. And my auntie Barbara did that throughout her life. She passed away during COVID-19. And that's another reason why I wrote this book the way I did. I bookended it talking about my mother and my aunts and my grandmother. And I ended it talking about them as well, to say, what brought me to Black feminism, right? What brought me to the intellectual work of Black feminism was the everyday quotidian nature of the Black feminist lessons I was getting from my mother and my aunts. My auntie Donna Faye saying, put those earrings on with that lipstick. My grandmother saying, people like us, we're going to be lonely in life. So you find people who love you and you love them back, right? These little lessons that I never forgot. One of the things my mom would always say is, never forget where you came from. Never forget where you came from. And now I have Sankofa's tattooed on both wrists, and I share this tattoo with my mother, right? There's things that she imparted in my life, and that my grandmother imparted in my life, and my aunts imparted, that had I not had those lessons, there'd be moments where I was in those boardrooms and I was the only Black girl, right? And I had to face these situations that I felt very unprepared for. But I remembered, wait, right? My grandmother already told me how to do this, right? She already taught me how to be lonely and keep pushing anyway. So it was important to honor the Fannie Lou's and the Bell Hookses and the Zora Neales, right? But to say, my mother is also an Angela Davis and a Zora Neale, right? My grandmother Lucille, she's also Toni Morrison in her own right, So
Yes.
it's not about the Black excellence of white institutions that have to recognize folks and give them these pieces of paper I have on the wall, right? Even without them, our Black feminist foremothers have been leading us and teaching us.
And I think there is often a disconnect for Black women when it comes to feminism because of what feminism has lacked. The intersectionality, the welcoming and things. And we've seen that even when we think about our sorority and how it started and how we were treated during the suffragette movement and asked to go to the back of the line.
That's right.
And in the marches and things like that, and all these stories. But I think we forget that feminism has been something we've practiced through our matrilineal power, through all these different things. And that's what I like about the way you weave the stories through this, because I think a lot of times we don't think feminism belongs to us because in some ways it hasn't, the way it's been defined by the larger culture. Right. Can you talk about that piece of it? Because sometimes I feel like we, even as Black women who have feminist agendas, for lack of a better word, or goals, and just want what's ours, don't feel like we can say that word in any way. I mean, even down to Alice Walker saying womanist instead.
That's right. Listen.
And I see us post about this all the time. So I'm really interested to hear your take on it.
So this is interesting because I feel like, fortunately or unfortunately, I, as an intellectual who is trained in a certain tradition at U Chicago, I've been in a bubble. And so on this book tour, I've gotten this question quite a bit. And I was like, oh, I didn't know we were still debating this. And apparently there's a resurgence in this debate. And so I'll start by talking about these kind of, waves of feminism that are really waves of white feminism, right? So we know the first wave of white feminism, this is white women, the Simone de Beauvoirs, who are saying, women shouldn't belong to their husbands. These are the Wollstonecrafts of the world, right? And in this era, it's predominantly white women, wealthy, middle-class white women who can read and are allowed to write these books and these stories. Who can say, I belong to myself in some respects. But they're not thinking about the same women that they have in their own homes who are serving them, who at the time are poor white women. And as we move into an era of the transatlantic slave trade, they're definitely not thinking about the women who they are treating as chattel in their homes, right? And so as we move into the civil rights era, we have the second wave of feminism where women are now, white women are thinking now about, labor outside the home. We know that in 1920, when white women were allowed to vote, Black women were still disenfranchised, to your point, right? And so they are still concerned with their own issues. It's not until the 1965 Civil Rights Act that we're actually, and the Voting Rights Act, that we're actually able to vote, right? They're not concerned with this in the 60s. They're thinking about their wage earning, right? Because a lot more men are working outside the home. And this is when we start to actually need two incomes to take care of a family. So as we move into the third wave, Now they're thinking about their bodies and sexual health and reproduction. This is when they start saying, I'm gonna take off my bra and I'm gonna burn it and I'm gonna have hairy underarms. And while this is important, right? This is an important moment. Black women are trying to survive. This is the Black power moment, right? So what we often see is that when Black women are thinking about their survival, we look at mainstream white feminism and it's completely out of touch. This is the same thing for mainstream, queer movements, the gay liberation movement, which has really been about assimilating into a heteronormative way of being, having the right to vote. Having the right to get married, being recognized by the state as valid citizens. Whereas young queer and trans teenagers, especially if they're people of color, Black folks in particular, are worried about having a place to sleep and eat. And think about the fact that they are more likely to be released from their employment if they're found out to be queer or trans, right? So there's always this kind of this dissonance between these mainstream movements and what Black folks, vulnerable folks, marginalized folks are experiencing on the ground. So the issue has been with feminism that unfortunately it's been associated with those mainstream white women who have largely been fighting to be more like white men. And a lot of them during that time have been racist and still are, right? So as they're engaging in these battles, they're not concerning themselves with the lives of the women who they still actively oppress. We see this most, I think, clearly when we think about the 53% or so of white women who turned out to vote for Donald Trump, even after he was on record saying aggressively violent things about women that were a description of sexual assault. Okay, so this is
I got that old Black lady tight lip. And you said it. I looked at myself and was like, "Oh snap! I'm that girl now."
Right, and so that's the dissonance, right? And so womanism emerges when women like Alice Walker and Bell Hooks see this distance between themselves and what they mean by a Black feminist liberation and this mainstream movement. Also, we know that there's antagonism from Black men toward this idea of feminism because it's also left them out and not centered their politics. Right. So when they hear feminist, they're thinking, oh, man hater, right? So there's this back and forth about that.
Especially when you talk about our freedom movements. I mean, that was a huge thing in the Black Panther Party, even though,
absolutely,
the women were doing the lion's share of the work.
Central to the work.
The breakfast programs, the things that actually were not objectionable to the greater population and even more conservative Black folks. It was women's work. Do you hope? Who did you write this book for? Because
I love that question.
Because, and I'm gonna be real specific about the question I asked for this, because given what you just talked about, I also see this book as a bridge in understanding for everybody to understand what intersectionality has tried to achieve throughout, even if that wasn't a word, even if that wasn't necessarily the stated goal of the women in the book.
I love this question. This question.
Go.
I love this question in part because when you talk about the breakfast programs, my mother herself was a child who benefited from the
That's right, because you were in Oakland.
That's right. My father was a Black Panther. And, I think about this a lot because that program got picked up nationally by schools. The free breakfast we now have, the free lunches we now have in schools stems a lot from the models that we got from the Black Panther Party, right? So when I talk about with this book, the question who I wrote this for is so interesting because I always say I wrote this for my mother. I wrote this for my grandmother. I wrote this for my aunties, right? And I made sure to name them. I used everyone's actual name. My cousin Mashawn, who used to braid my hair, she's in the book, right? It's important for me to cite Black women, but to also make sure that we remember, right? A lot of this story here is two things I wanted to accomplish really is archiving us, right? Unfortunately, Black women, we don't typically enter the archive unless it's through deep pain and trauma or through the lenses of someone else, right? And so it was imperative for me to tell a true story, right? The whole story, and for it to not involve trauma, right? For it to be about joy and self-reclamation and about self-care and self-love and the ways that we ourselves have everything that we need to achieve what is perfect for us.
Don't make me fight you today, Jen. Oh, wait, girl. Okay.
Right?
Sorry. I had a whole moment because yes, and yes, and yes.
Right. That's the
All of
central
those things.
purpose of this book, right? So that Black women can pick it up and say, "Oh, I've already got it." Right? We've already been teaching each other this stuff,
Yeah.
right? The second thing is on your point of intersectionality. It is so critical, and this is why this book is actually based on a course I teach at Syracuse University to my young people. This is an undergrad course and a graduate course. And why this book was so important for me was because I teach them from day one. The first thing we read is the Combahee River Collective, which is the first articulation of intersectionality in 1976. And we always talk about Kimberly Crenshaw's work in 1989, 1991, which is imperative because it actually gives us the language. But we already had the genealogy, right? Anna Julia Cooper wrote A Voice from the South in 1892. 1892. Okay. So 90 years before we got that word, she was already writing that. Ida B. Wells, she also wrote Southern Horrors in 1892, right? So these women were writing just 3 decades after the formal end of slavery. And that's the early genealogy of intersectionality. Frances Beale told us in the 1960s about this idea of a double consciousness for Black women, right? A double threat, right? And we don't acknowledge this genealogy, but I wanted to do that with this book to say, we've always been intersectional. Our work has always been intersectional because we move in multiple valences at all times. We don't have the privilege of leaving our identity at the door. The first time I heard that, I was being trained for my job at Disney, and they said, "Leave your identities at the door." And I looked around like, well, that's easy. Everyone in here is white, right? Like you can just walk in and just be white, which is also an identity, right?
They
Right.
said that.
Right. And I'm like, well, I guess y'all just talking to me. Right. And this is the problem, is that Black feminism has never been concerned with this requirement. Right. Black feminism is about us surviving, believing that Black women are human, believing that we have a right to live, a right to feed ourselves, access to healthcare, that we don't deserve disparate conditions on our jobs. Right. It's simply saying that we actually get to be full citizens because we are enough, right? And so my hope is with this book, by spotlighting my mother, who was a social worker for 35 years, my grandmother, who when she passed away was still living in Section 8 housing, right? My aunts, who all worked into their 60s, 70s, and some even into their 80s, right? You know, that these women's lives are just as critical to us understanding what it means to be intersectional. They were holding disabilities in their bodies. They had come from different class backgrounds and had navigated very complex state-based systems that were keeping them from the things that they needed to survive, right? And in watching them growing up, I learned a whole lot more than I learned in school. Right, all of the women in this book who I write about, the intellectuals, the social movement organizers, that was self-taught. I couldn't even find a class at school that would teach me Black feminist politics. There was not one offered at USC when I was an undergrad. I had to go and find every single one of those books, every lecture, every video, every poem on my own. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I know exactly what you're saying, because I'm a generation before you, and also went to school and went to a school that had a robust African
Mhm.
American studies program that did serve this to a certain degree, but
Mm.
it was still lacking, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean, and even in HBCUs at a certain point, that
Mhm.
was lacking, right? Because
Yeah.
there wasn't an organized way, I think, of looking at it. But one thing I want to talk about, because you bring up a point about identity that I think is such a good way to enter this conversation of how I see fearless authenticity leading to
Mhm.
our purpose, right?
Mhm.
Um, and you touched on something that made me think about something one of my Black gay male friends said to
Yeah.
me one time, that sometimes he feels like he has to choose
Hmm.
between being gay and being Black. And
Mhm.
what you just talked about, is how there isn't really an equivalent for
Mhm.
women.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that is informed by patriarchy,
Mhm.
but I want to talk about your identity.
Yeah.
In your bio, you say you identify as a gender flux,
Yeah.
androgynous Black woman, and lesbian.
Yeah.
Um, and from the book, the way you talk about it in relationship to the women that you talk about, it
Yeah.
sounds to me like your exploration of an expression, verbally expression of
Mhm.
your identity, and claiming that actually connects with and freed you up to
Mhm.
fulfill your purpose and your life's work in seeing that
That's
as a
right.
totality.
That's right.
I'm not even sure what my question is with
I
this.
love the way you just summed that up. I just love everything about that. Yes.
Oh, good, good, yay! Because I'm just reading and taking it in and getting to know. Like I feel like I got to know you by reading parts of this book, right?
Yeah.
But how does that naming and claiming and discovery
Mhm.
lead to your
Mhm.
purpose?
I love that question. That's absolutely right. It's so interesting because I'm learning so much about myself as well through this book. This book was a journey. And on my book tour recently, George Johnson, one of my dear friends and author, asked me if the reason why this book doesn't fit neatly into a genre is partly because of my own non-conforming nature and my experience with transness. And I was like, whoa, and hearing your question, that makes so much sense to me, right? So to answer the question, yes, I am gender flux, meaning that I don't feel, most of the time I feel agender. So in this moment, I don't really feel a gender. I'm a social scientist, so I'm always like, I walk up to people, do you feel a gender right now? Like how does gender feel for you? Right? Because I find it interesting because I don't understand what that feels like. And I'll talk to people and they say, yeah, I absolutely feel like a man. Here's how it feels for me. And I think that's really interesting. I've never had that.
Mhm.
And I'm gender flux because there are times where I feel like a woman. I feel very womanly. Like when I was pregnant with my children, that was the time in my life where I felt like, oh my gosh, I feel like a woman. I feel very much like a woman. And so there are the way I've been socialized, the communities that I've moved in, I feel most comfortable with other gender non-binary, gender flux people, but also with Black women. That is home for me. And I believe that Black womanhood is expansive enough to hold someone like me.
Oh, wait, you froze a little bit. Hold up. Uh-oh. Hold on. Okay, I'm not quite sure what to do either at this point. Oh wait, hold up. Jen. Okay, there you are. There you are. You're back. You froze right after it said, and we'll edit out this part. You froze right
Okay.
after you said Black womanhood can hold someone like me. So
Oh
you
gosh.
did
Okay.
finish that sentence. You did finish that
Okay.
sentence.
Okay.
So pick up from
Oh,
there if
okay.
you can remember.
Um, okay. And just so you know, the weather here is really bad and it knocks our internet out. So
Uh,
hopefully that won't happen again. But
if not, we'll edit just like this part.
okay. Yes, so Black womanhood is expansive enough to hold folks who are along these non-binary valences and spectrums, because I fundamentally believe that Blackness itself is queer, right?
Mm.
These, I know people, it's a
Wait,
whole
I want to
thing.
hear more. But
Well,
finish your answer and
okay,
then come
okay,
back to
okay,
that.
okay, okay. And so I don't subscribe to these buckets that have been really forced on us by a mainstream society. This goes back to Hortense Spiller's work on American grammar, thinking about the ways that we were forced into binaries to exploit our labor, right? To exploit our bodies. Enslavement, there was a whole industry where you wanted folks who could reproduce so that you could grow your capital. That's what it was all about, right? And so a lot of the gender normativity that we align ourselves with, frankly, isn't ours. And it doesn't align with our ancestral and African traditions. It just doesn't, right?
And many indigenous traditions.
That's right. And so for me, I subscribe to the notion that I can be gender flux androgynous, meaning I show up in whatever I show up and you're gonna get what you're gonna get, right?
And that's so
Um,
Black.
It might be lipstick today. It might be Jordan's tomorrow. I don't care what you have to say. I don't care what the attire standard is for your gender ideals. I'm going to show up in this body the way that I want to show up, and you don't get to project onto me how I should look based on the gender that you're reading from me. And this is also in the tradition of Audre Lorde, who always declared who she was. She said she was a lesbian mother, feminist poet, right? She said she was a warrior poet, right? And so I name myself in these ways, and I show in the book the progression of me kind of understanding what these things meant for me. When I start the book, I'm a child, right? I'm young, and I'm trying to figure out where I fit. I talk about my mother jamming me in these dresses and shoes that I could not stand, right? But that my gender queer body didn't accept those things. I was 6'4" by the time I was 13 years old. I was 5'5" by the time I was 8 or 9. So I was already taller than my mother. So there were a lot of things that she could not do anymore. So she had to also think, how do I raise this giant child in a city where she really needs to be small, right? This child needs to be small because here, being big is not going to keep you alive,
Right.
you know? And so my relationship to my gender was very hard for the first, 20, 30 years of my life, because I had to shrink in a place where feminized bodies, fem-red bodies were often under attack.
And shrinking does not serve your purpose ever.
No, it does
So
not.
for you, this really was about that walking right into what your work was.
That's right.
And I also want to, because the one chapter that I think really shows the transition, if we will, and I don't know if
Yeah,
I'm using the
transition
right
work.
word for that,
Mhm.
the Zora Neale Hurston chapter, and what she
Yeah,
talked to you about reclamation of labor.
yeah,
And you've mentioned this before, being, an engineer, working at Disney, very corporate, especially at that point, situation, working yourself to the bone till, like quite literally in a
yes,
life-threatening situation with one of your pregnancies,
that's right.
still getting raked over the coals, all these
Yes,
different things, and not being true to yourself.
that's right.
There was a turning point where you knew
Yes,
things had to change because that
yes.
choice of doing that was out of alignment for you and your purpose. What was that? What was that turning point?
Mhm.
And more specifically, what did it spark in you that led to this self-discovery journey?
Oh, love this. So, I was 23 years old. I was very, very young, and I'm a disabled person, so I have Marfan syndrome, and it's a congenital heart disease. And most folks with Marfan syndrome are not allowed to have children because it can cause major catastrophic heart issues that often lead to like immediate death. So um, me having children was off the table, but I was also queer, so I was like, that's fine. However, when I met my husband in college, we became best friends, and we decided we wanted to have a family together. We fell in love, and I ended up having open heart surgery in college, and because of that emergency open heart surgery, I was able to have children. So this was a big deal, right, for me. And when I got to Disney, I was so enamored by them. I was so enamored. I had grown up watching all the Disney movies. I still can tell you every word to Cinderella. It's my all-time favorite Disney movie, you know?
And I guess it doesn't hurt that your husband grew up in Anaheim too,
Literally down the street, you know?
in the shadow of Disneyland.
We used to go there just for fun on the weekends. After classes, we just go hang out at Disneyland. We had season passes for years. So I was in love with this place. And as a child, when you're dreaming of getting out of somewhere that feels so violent, you want to go to the happiest place on earth. I believed it. I believed it implicitly. So when I got there, and I'm this disabled, pregnant Black girl, and I'm trying to navigate this environment, and they're being racist and saying things like, Africans like you had to work in the back when I got here. And I'm like, I'm from 6 hours up the road. I'm from Oakland, or, those cornrows in your hair, those weren't allowed. And I'm like, these aren't even cornrows, they're two-strand twists, Right? Like, right. Like they would just say things about my body and my hair. In the middle of a meeting, I'll never forget, this woman said, "Jen, these are the favorite of your hairs. I've never seen your hair like this." And I was like, it's like a room of 50 people. This is my favorite of your hairs. Thanks. I guess. I don't know, right? They would touch me without my consent, all of these things. And here I am, this young girl, not understanding why this is making me recoil, why this is making why I'm, fainting at work, and I'm grinding my teeth in my sleep, and I'm having migraines, and I'm getting sick all the time. So what ended up happening actually is that two things. Oscar Grant was killed by Officer Meserly, at the Fruitvale Station, the BART station, which is literally 10 minutes from my grandmother's home. I took that BART station everywhere because I lived right up the street and my grandmother was there. So that's how I saw my grandmother. My nail shop was there. My favorite burrito shop was there. And when it happened, it gutted me. I couldn't hold it. I couldn't hold it. I couldn't watch the movie for years. I didn't watch it until 3 years later. I sobbed crying. Oscar went to the same high school as me. So I witnessed that, and then it just kept happening. It kept happening. Ayanna Stanley Jones was killed laying in a bed with her grandmother in Detroit. Then Trayvon Martin was killed. John Crawford was shot in a Walmart while carrying a BB gun from the Walmart. And as all these things are happening, I'm going to work. And these people are calling me African and talking about Colin Tyrone from the ghetto and things like this. And I felt like I was in a prison of my own creation, you know? I felt like I felt like I was in a waiting place, but a place that was I felt tortured. And I called my mother on the phone, and I talked to my mother-in-law, and I said, "How did y'all do this? Because y'all worked in corporate America 35 years. How did you do this?" And my mother-in-law was like, "I honestly don't know." And I said to my mom, she said, "I don't know how I survived that." And I said to my mom, I said, "What were all those books I was reading back home, at the foot of your bed?" And she said, "All you ever wanted to read was Toni Morrison and Terry McMillan and Alice Walker." She said, "Go to the bookstore and find them." And I went to the bookstore, to Borders Bookstore, which was down the street in Orange County. And I went to find Alice Walker, and I found Alice Walker. And next to Alice Walker was Melissa Harris Perry's Sister Citizen. And I saw that book, and it was a Black woman with this, painting of a flag on her head. And I was like, "What's in this book?" And I opened it, and I started reading about the Sapphire, which I had never heard about, the angry Black woman who's just mad because she's mad all the time, the Jezebel, the hypersex Black woman, and the Mammy who just asexual and just wants to care for the white family. And I start crying into this book because it was the first time I had read a Black feminist text in my life. And I had never read this thing called nonfiction, right? I had been reading fiction and fiction and fiction and fiction. I had never read nonfiction. I certainly hadn't read any about me and about my family. And as I'm reading this, I was seeing my aunts, I was seeing my grandmother, I was seeing my cousins. And I was like, what is this?
And you were also seeing the characters in the books
That's
the
right.
novels you had been reading, because
I sure
Toni,
was.
Alice, the people you were reading.
That's right.
Yeah.
Everything. It was like I can remember this moment so clearly.
Or you saw the Matrix. Tell the truth. You saw the Matrix.
I'm trying to tell you, that's what happened.
It all fell into place.
That's right. And I'm sitting there, and the thing that really got me was when she talked about the crooked room, and how we walk around as Black women and we think that we are crooked. We think that we are askew. But what it is that the room is crooked. And we are standing upright. And the rooms that we walk into are rooms full of stereotypes about our bodies, rooms that expect us to show up and be angry, or expect us to be hypersexed or unprepared or lazy, right? All these things that I had been experiencing at work. And I said, "You know what? This ain't it for me." And I literally, from that moment, decided, whatever Melissa Harris Perry is doing, this is what I need to do. I took all her citations, and I started reading them. I read Bell Hooks, I read Audre Lorde, and I came upon Kathy Cohen. Kathy Cohen is a political scientist at U Chicago. And I read her work, and I was like, she's a queer political scientist. And I felt drawn to this work. I felt drawn to how she described her story and her life and how she wrote about it. And I said, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do. I want to be a political scientist. I want to go back to school. And I shifted my entire life. Over 3 years, I planned an exit from corporate America. And I applied to all the schools. I got into U Chicago. I worked with Kathy Cohen, and I'm now going to speak to her on Thursday at the University of Chicago Public Policy Hair School. and that was me finding my purpose. I had to chase it. I had to go after it. But it started with that book.
There's so much in that. I want to go back to what you said, a prison of your own making, because I think so many people, even though your example is a really stark one, I think that it is what I'm talking about when I talk about finding fearless authenticity, finding that expression of yourself, that you are here to find that purpose, right?
Yeah.
But other people's expectations, encouragement from others, following what we've been told or seen, especially things that are from that crooked room that don't fit us. What do you think were the factors that made you pursue something that wasn't in alignment with who you were? And then how did you dismantle it?
I have to be completely honest, right? My mother named me Jennifer Marcella Logan because she said that was a good name to go on a resume because they would actually call me in for an interview. I was raised to assimilate. I was raised to be respectable. I was raised to lower my voice and to shrink and to fit into these standards of whiteness. And that's why I went to Disney. I said, that's the whitest place I can think of. What is whiter than Disney, right? They try to be woke, but they're really not, right? And so I was pushed into these crooked rooms because I was under the impression that was how I was going to survive. That was how I was going to make it out of my situation, out of my conditions in this city that had always been, while it was home, very dangerous and very scary to me, right? And it wasn't necessarily about, Black excellence or success as much as it was about, here's the way I've been taught to do it, right? This is the formula I was given, and I don't know any other way. I didn't even know what graduate school was. I didn't even know I didn't know how people became doctors. I knew medical doctors went to medical school. That was all I knew, right? And so going into these conditions that did not fit my body, I felt was at the time my only option. And it was when I started to really first take stock of what my body was telling me, right? Because your nervous system is the first thing that clues you in. This is not it, right? Your nervous system is trying to warn you.
The headaches, the knots in your stomach.
Right. I was too young for those things to be happening and too healthy. And I started taking stock of my nervous system. Why am I sick? Why am I feeling this way? What is happening to me? And I had to unlearn all these things that I had learned about survival, that you're just supposed to be in pain. You're supposed to just grin and bear it. You better be lucky you got a job, right? All these messages that had taught me that you should just absorb the harm and just push through. And then as I started reading these books from these Black women, especially Audre Lorde, they were like, don't do that. That's not going to work, because if you do that, you're going to end up in an early grave. And unfortunately, a lot of them did, right? Fannie Lou Hamer passed away at 60. And on her death certificate, they called her a housekeeper. And there's nothing wrong with being a housekeeper. She just wasn't a housekeeper.
That wasn't who she was.
Zora Neale Hurston died of malnutrition.
Yeah.
Malnutrition, and was buried in an unmarked grave, right? So as I was reading these things, it was also cluing me into the fact that, oh, you have also been working against yourself. You've been doing this labor. You've been giving away your labor, not getting promotions, doing bigger and better jobs, and bringing so much esteem and acclaim to this institution that is going to suck you dry. And the day you pass out and die, they're going to replace you. and
Girl,
they're
that
gonna put your name.
that job will be posted, baby.
Posted with probably better pay. Okay. So that to me, I realized, was not enough for me. And it was not fair to my children. It wasn't fair to my children. It wasn't fair to my community. And it certainly wasn't serving my ancestors. And I kept thinking, my ancestors had done so much for me. And they deserve me to do more than this, than to work. I learned that term, I work to live, I don't live to work. And I kept repeating that to myself. Like, I don't want to live to work at this place. I got to a point where I realized I was working so many long hours, I hadn't seen the sun in 3 weeks. I
In,
hadn't seen the sun.
in California.
In Southern California, I hadn't seen the sun because they were working me so hard and extracting so much labor and using me as an example to other people that I wasn't even going outside during daylight hours. And I said, enough is enough.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Because sometimes I get the question from clients or people when I talk about fearless authenticity and finding, your true value, your worth.
Mhm.
And a lot of times I approach it from work because so many of us identify with that so much. But the way you just encapsulated kind of how you had to extract yourself from finding the value at work and is so, that's a beautiful way of expressing it because
Mhm.
a lot of times, our mothers tell us when we go to school, be yourself,
Mhm.
right? And you'll find your friends and 100% true. It
Yeah,
sounds so trite and what have you, but a lot of times we don't know how to be ourselves.
that's right.
And we have to discover it by peeling away these layers. So thank you for taking us through that
Mhm.
from your perspective. It does seem like you are walking in your purpose now. When
Yeah.
did you know that you were walking in your purpose? Like, and are you even aware of it at this point? Because sometimes
Yeah.
partially it feels unreal. I've heard that from people and
Yeah.
sometimes experience it myself. So if and when you know
Yeah.
that you're in your purpose, what was that moment like? And
Yeah.
when have you felt that the most?
All great questions. I don't even know if this is like therapy right now. So, what's really funny is so I started writing this book in 2019. I started writing it just before COVID changed the world. And most of the book was written during COVID-19. And sitting in a house and having to look at myself really affected me. It really sent me through a major transition. That word, I like that transition because that's when I started identifying differently. I started identifying with androgyny more, my transness and my gender. I cut all my hair off, right? And I realized I was wearing drag. Like a lot of things happened. I threw out all these dresses that I was like, I don't even know why I was wearing that, right? And it wasn't until this book came out and I had like my first book events and I was sitting in the room and I was looking around at all these people and I felt so powerful. I felt so powerful. And I've been getting there, right? In the writing of the book and in the, coming into my body. I've been tattooing very meaningful tattoos that represented my journey over the course of the last 5 years or so. I started reading more about Buddhism and really thinking about my identity and my purpose. But it really wasn't until this book tour that I really realized, oh, I'm fully in my purpose now, right? I think that because so another part of me is that because I was trained to shrink and to be small, speaking has never been something I enjoyed doing, right? Being in front of people and having the microphone or the megaphone, I don't do it. Even in organizing, you'll never see a picture of me with the megaphone. Like I'm always helping people get organized and I'm in all type of movements. I was in BYP 100 for 5 years. You'll never see a picture of me in front. I'm always in the back. Because I've always been too shy, to be in front of anything. And this book tour has put me in spaces that have been so warm and so loving and have been so engaged with this work and so committed to a Black feminist praxis that I feel so safe to do this work now. I feel so confident in my body to do this work, but I also feel like, the people who have a problem with it, I just don't care anymore, right? Like I feel very much the fearless thing is interesting because I've been telling people on the book tour, I don't quote Brene Brown very much. She's not, whatever. different conversation. But one thing that she wrote that has always stuck with me is her idea of what bravery is about, right? It's about doing the scary thing, even though you're still kind of afraid, right? And
Because
I,
fearless is
right,
psychotic. If
right,
you don't
right,
have fear, that's psychotic.
right, right. And my authenticity has always come from a place of I'm scared as hell. Right. That's really scary, but I gotta do it. And what I found is, especially on this book tour, as someone who's had deep social anxiety and faced death threats from trolls online, and during COVID, just didn't want to go outside because of those things. I'm on my 12th book event. I'm on a third leg of a book tour. I'm flying all over the country, and I've never felt more powerful in my life. So really, it's now. I think I'm coming up with my 40th birthday in September, and I'm feeling like, oh, I can do anything. I can do absolutely anything.
I love that for you. I love that for you, especially at this age.
Yeah,
And because I also feel like this is a manifesto for you.
it is.
And writing it down and going through that process, especially at a time when we were all cocooning and scared and all those and doing all the same things in our own different ways.
Hmm.
It's another birth. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I,
I
I write
love,
that. I write that in the book. I think I said that about my
yep.
birthday that I had during COVID. I was like, this felt like my first birthday. I was like, this. I felt like
Mm,
I was being born. You know.
mhm,
And I don't
mm,
know how to explain that to people, but once you're able to name yourself and sit in your body in a way that feels comfortable for the first time, it
mhm.
does feel like another birth. It's like, hello, everyone. I would like to introduce you to myself, and everyone's like, I've
Wow,
known you for 20 years. And I'm like,
wow.
I'm different now.
That's so interesting because I was thinking about it in terms of the book being another birth for you.
Mm.
I wasn't
Mhm.
thinking about, oh my goodness, I love that even more because I
Yeah,
think it's both,
it is.
perhaps,
It
perhaps.
is.
Um, I do want to make one comment because you talk about social media and stuff.
Yeah.
That's my first encounter with you.
Yeah.
I started following you because I saw your post about not wanting to witness any more Black bodies in pain, and that would when that I don't know if it went viral, but it was viral amongst Black
Mhm.
Twitter for me,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
I had already made that same decision, and I was like, "Thank God
Mhm.
somebody else sees this," because there were times when I felt ashamed when people were like, "Did you see?" And I'm like, "No, I've chosen not to." And it's
That's
like,
right.
"Why?" And then you have to make all of these explanations why. And I
Mhm.
was still thinking about I was at that time defining fearless authenticity as a concept and what I wanted to teach and
Mhm.
share with
Mhm.
people. And it was a challenge for me. And it was so nice to see that somebody else was in the
Yeah.
same space. So I
Yeah.
understand that fear about, even though I've not experienced it in the way that you have with the trolls or
Mhm.
things like that. But how has that experience shaped how you define yourself? Because
Mm.
a lot of times with social media, there is a
Yeah.
temptation to go, well, maybe I need to look at this a certain way.
You know, there's two things in what you're saying that I think are so important. And the first thing is, so I was on Twitter the other day, and another study has been released that shows that when Black Americans are exposed to news about the deaths of other Black people at the hands of police, they have a harder time sleeping than when this happens to white Americans. We get this news all the time where there's some story about how Black Americans are disparately affected by this news. And those tweets I sent out actually stem from my experience with my next book, right? My book, Policing Blackness. Um, I started those interviews in 2018, and those continued through 2022. And it's with all young Black Americans between 18 and 35 across the country, Chicago, Houston, Philly, everywhere. And when I would ask them, what do you consider a threat? And they would list whatever they wanted. And they started with police, and then they'd say white women, teachers, they'd list all these people in places that are meant to be safe. And in those conversations, the things they would tell me about these interactions were so triggering for them and for me. And it made me realize that, I was holding a lot of trauma from having witnessed all of that, right? All growing up. And then having to re-watch it, right? In these auto streaming videos on social media, people sending it to you unwanted in your DMs, right? And so that was a proclamation to say we don't have to be subjected to seeing ourselves in that way, right? And the other part of this is that, when you're constantly harassed on social media for existing in your skin, right? I don't think the things I say are that provocative. They're just not. It's astounding to me how unprovocative they are. But because a Black gender flux lesbian is saying them, and I use they them pronouns, they're livid. How dare I speak?
How
Right?
dare you
How
exist?
dare I exist? How dare I have things to say? Right? And all of these things are wrapped up together because social media has become such a violent space, especially for Black women who are of a liberatory practice, who are on the freedom side. But I refuse to be quiet. I tell people all the time, I talk so much, I talk in my sleep. So it's not gonna happen, right? It's not gonna happen. um, but I think it's all in an effort to silence us. And we get to make choices about how we consume media, how we engage in media, where we show up, what we say, what we don't say. And all of this current moment of trying to legislate us out of the world, to remove jobs that we're in, to get us to get off of social media, right? Because it's actually changed the world, right? They are terrified of us. They are terrified of
Something
us.
as simple as Black Twitter got people shaking. And
They are
quite
out of
literally,
it.
the thing that's crazy about it is that for me, Black Twitter is entertainment. Like, I don't even
It
know how they
is.
don't like why you mad, fam? Like, you
They're
should be
so
laughing at this.
mad. Oh, they're
Like,
so
you
mad.
big mad over
They're so
something
mad.
like literally the right, literally the unseriousness of our people
Mm.
in Black Twitter. Like, if they actually engaged with it, they would be like, oh,
Oh, they're so
oh,
mad. But
oh,
but but we're
but they can't.
Black in public. We're Black in public. We have
Ah,
joy, we have fellowship, we have community. And next thing you know, we're Black identity extremists, right? Where
mm.
two or more of us are together, they're afraid, right? And I think that is incredible. I love everything about it. I love to disrupt. I love that we can take that power and use it to change the future. I believe that Black people exist in the future. I believe that we are absolutely here for a reason and we have a purpose, right? And so there's no version of this social media moment that is going to see itself without me.
And what I love about what you just said is it is just by being, because that has always been my point. It is just
Hmm.
by doing what we do and being who we are,
Hmm.
you know, stay mad, choke on it.
Couldn't care less.
What else? What else?
Couldn't care less. Could not care. And I'll tell them I don't care. I don't care.
And
I
isn't
don't
that
care.
and I'm glad that you have gotten to that point at this age, because usually that fuck it moment comes a little bit closer to 50. It starts at 40, but I'm so glad that whatever, but I also think the pandemic played into that for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
That I don't know that we fully explored how the pandemic has changed all of
Yeah.
us and changed the world because we're scared to engage with that. But I do think that is one thing I have seen for a lot of people, is that
Absolutely.
it's because it pushed us to the edge and we didn't have a choice.
That's right. We're tired. We're tired. And that's what young people told me too in these interviews. They're like, I'm tired. And these are young people, 20 years old, 30
Zing.
years old.
That's
I'm
what Gen
tired.
Z, the Z's. I always keep watching the Z's because I'm like, y'all sleepers. Y'all are
Listen,
sleepers
they are
because
sick of it. They've had it up to here. Okay.
right?
They are done. So
Done with
I love
everybody.
it. I
Me
love it.
too. Me too. All right. Winding down with a few of the last questions I always ask everyone.
Yeah.
Best piece of advice you've ever received?
Oh goodness. I have to always go back to my grandmother. My grandmother was incredible. She was a Libra. She was very Bell Hooksian. Both of my grandmothers were Libras. She's the one who told me that I was going to be lonely. She told me when I was 11, and I was like, "Grandma, come on." But she said, "You're going to be lonely, so you find the people who love you and you love them back." And I got that lesson again when I was in college. My uncle told me, this is the last time I saw my uncle. He was dying of cancer and he didn't tell me. And he took me out. I was in LA at the time, and we were overlooking the Santa Ana River at Griffith Park. And he said, you and I, we are esoteric people. Some people will get us, but a lot of people won't, and that's okay. But you stick to your people. And I believe these lessons have come from the same place. These were people who were looking out for me, who were like, you're different. You're different. You have a gift. Embrace that gift. Don't let nobody tamp out that gift, And it's mattered so much to me in my adult life because I do have a propensity to people please and to try and bring everybody along. Oh, I want you to come. I love you so much. But I always hear my grandma and my uncle saying, hey, 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 everybody can't come. Everybody can't come. Everybody can't come. When I'm running off on this journey to find my purpose and do what I have to do, it's only some people who can ride on the ride. Everybody ain't got a ticket.
Wow. True. So true. What is your proudest achievement so far?
Mm-hmm.
And what this is a two-parter. And what do you still dream of doing?
My proudest achievement is as easy as my children. I don't know if I can call them an achievement because they're their own people. But I have 3 beautiful, incredible, brilliant children. They are so funny. They all have my face. So you're welcome, kids. Because I'm cute. But no, I because I was told I could never have children. There's just something very special about be able to have 3 such unique people who call me mother. So that's just, it warms everything about my life. What I dream about is, this is going to sound completely different from the whole rest of the interview. I want to own land and I want horses. That's what I want.
Wait.
I just want to be, I want horses and I want them to run around and I want to comb their hair and take care of them and I want them to have fun. I'm not riding the horses. I don't want to ride them. I want them to be, because I just want them to be happy. I'm like 6'4", 250 pounds. So I'd have to get them big old horses for me to ride them. I'm scared. But I just want horses to run free and live their lives. And I'd be like, hey, horse, how you doing? That's my
I love that dream for you. I love that dream.
I want that so bad.
I love that dream for you. Hey, girl, and listen, here's the thing. Black country folk, I want
the cowboy hat.
Right. Beyonce is shining a light on Black cowboy culture and things like that. But trust me when I tell you, as somebody who grew up in Southwest Louisiana,
listen.
I
want my little moo-moo. I want to go out in the field and have the wind blowing. I want cowboy. I want the whole experience. I want it.
Yes, I love it. And then my final question, Jenn M. Jackson, when do you feel that you are at your best, truest, most authentic version of you?
If I'm going to be honest, it's everywhere. I have made a decision. I am no longer code switching for anyone. I'm not playing small for anybody. I am not shifting my opinions, ideas, who I am. I'm not going to try and sound less smart because people in the room don't know big words. I'm not going to do any of that. I walk into the room as Dr. Jenn Jackson in every room. And if people are intimidated, that's a them problem. And I don't hold it anymore. So everywhere I feel my most authentic self in my body, wherever my body happens to be.
I love that. And I pray for that for all of us.
Me too.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So listen, I love every single conversation I have on this podcast, but this one was special because I feel like Jenn is what I was thinking of in every way about how authenticity can serve us and free us up to be our best selves and get all the success that we're working for, because that really seems like that was their trajectory, that things really took off once they owned all of who they were. So thank you, Jenn, for sharing your story. Really appreciate it. Here's some of my highlights from our conversation. The power of not caring what people think anymore and the process to get to that point, because it is a process. And even acknowledging still having some fear around the dangers, the very real physical dangers for Jenn of expressing their identity, but also just being scared, period, of taking that chance for ourselves. I love that they said not playing small. No, we don't need to do that. No more of that. And also taking the power to name ourselves, which I think applies to more than just those people who are living beyond gender norms, right? It's for any of us who have any kind of identity or experience or something that other people decide they want to put a label on, right? No, no, no. They can do that for themselves, but you take the power to do that for yourself, naming yourself. I also love Jenn's thoughts on what the struggle really is, the struggle for liberation really is from oppressive systems and oppressive people. That it's not just about becoming like them, getting power like them, but creating something new and focusing the fight on the freedom to be ourselves and operate in something that supports that for everyone in an equitable sense. I loved our conversation about the toxicity of corporate culture and how you exit that, because there's a lot of realizations that have to happen along the way. And I think Jenn expressed that really well about what their elders taught them, right? There's these dreams about and prescriptions about what excellence looks like, what Black excellence in particular looks like, but that may not work for all of us. And there's an unlearning that needs to happen, and then figuring out what the new thing looks like. I went through that myself in a smaller way. Not that I was coming from a toxic situation per se, even though there were some. For me, it was about defining what my business was going to be, what I had to offer. And I think for a lot of us, whether it's becoming an entrepreneur or finding another job that fits better, it's about unlearning something that we thought was right about that situation, letting it go, and then moving on. I love, though, Jenn's thought process with this one saying that I've heard before, but it brought new meaning based on our conversation. I work to live. I don't live to work. And then to the book, Black women sure did teach us a lot. Female elders, though, preparing us to see ourselves in the world. That really struck me because their wisdom and the advice they use to protect us, I really relate to, not necessarily, well, yeah, from Black women in my life, of course, but also from my father. I talk about this a lot on my social media, his Sparrow-isms, right? For me, I didn't understand what he was trying to tell me back in the day. And now it makes so much more sense. And I feel like there's a parallel with Jenn's book, with the wisdom that's in there. It's an interpretation once you've had enough experience to look at the lessons we were given and see them in a new light. I love one of the lessons: find people who love you and you love them back. Isn't that simple, but not necessarily always easy to do? Got to focus on that one. And then finally, I think the real big importance of this book is telling and archiving our stories and telling the whole thing. I love how Jenn talked about it's not just about the trauma, it's about the joy, the self-reclamation, the self-care, the self-love, and the way that we already have everything that we need to achieve. I remember when my therapist said to me, "You already have everything you need." You know, it was life-changing for me. So thank you, Jenn, for your intelligence, your scholarship, and for this book. Please get it. Black Women Taught Us, wherever you buy your books. I also want to express my thanks to you, my Fearless Authenticity listeners. Thank you so much for checking this out. I appreciate you, and I wouldn't do it without you. And y'all know I couldn't do it without my team, my amazing producers, Lisa E, Vicky, Wayne, Jess. Thank you for your hard work every single week. Thank you, Jerry Johnson, for the music. And please rate, review, download, subscribe, share, do some kind of action with this episode wherever you get your podcast, including on YouTube. Every time you do something, every like counts to help expand our reach and show this episode and others to more people. I'd also be honored if you join my community. Please sign up for my newsletter so you can hear all the latest that's going on in the Fearless Authenticity community. That's at fearlessauthenticity.com. You can also follow me on social media at Ms. Jeanne Sparrow. That's on YouTube, where this what do you call this thing? This podcast lives. Also on Facebook and TikTok, and at JM Sparrow on Instagram and Twitter/X. This has been Fearless Authenticity with Jeanne Sparrow. Thank you, and I'll see you again soon.